What's up? Hey y'all, it's me, Brianca Jay. Thank you for tuning in to my show, Book Talk, where we talk all things books. We do literary analysis, reviews, and recommendations. Every once in a while, I even do a story time. So if you like that and you enjoy books and nerding out with me, I want you to do me a favor and hit subscribe right now. My goal is to reach 200 by October 31st, and I'm happy to say we are only 7 subscribers away. So thank you so much. As you watch this video, feel free to leave a comment, like, subscribe, do all the things. These really help me. That is done with that. My second order of business. I have a children's book, and it'll be out and available to the public November 28th. And I want to just encourage you guys to check it out. Come to my virtual launch party on Facebook Live and do all the things. Of course, these types of events need a community, so I'm asking my community, and I hope that you guys can make it. Without further ado, I will talk about the reason for censorship on Huckleberry Finn. I do want you to know that these are not necessarily my thoughts. I've collected this data from a lot of really celebrated critics and academics and scholars who have all taken the time out to really build a case about censorship for Huckleberry Finn, because they just find the text to be grotesque and disrespectful. Huckleberry Finn, if you don't know, is about the coming-age story of a young boy who wants to escape. He's traveling down the river with a black counterpart, and he's helping him escape slavery and these things of this nature. And so the book is meant to be it's meant to be humorous as well as a satire, but throughout the years people have found it to be deeply disturbing and have made a case for removing it from schools and the literary canon. So before we begin, I'm going to go through the historical challenges presented by Arlene Harris Mitchell. So the first thing is 1897, Brander Matthews of the London Saturday Review praises Huckleberry Finn and T.S. Perry of the Century magazine and commented favorably, yet this was a rare opinion at the time. Very rare. The Century had which had serialized the work, had already done some censorship of chapters to be included. So, in the 19th century, however, critics began to praise both the novel and the author, arguing that earlier censorship was not so much a problem due to the morality issues that Huck embodies, but due to the heroic portrayal of the Negro character. 100 years after 100 years after publicized critics revisit the novel to honor the honesty portrayed in the novel, especially of Jim's character. The Office of Intellectual Freedom of the American Library Association rates Huckleberry Finn as the most offensive novel. Then, in the 1980s through the 1990s, the book was challenged in schools and throughout America, primarily because of the depiction of African Americans and the focus of the word nigger and its appropriated use within the novel. Niggergim is an adjective that was never used throughout the work. So, using journals from high school students, Hall reflects the students in discomfort with the use of the word, along with embarrassment they suffered. So, over time, as you can see, a lot of the depiction of the work has changed and went through its own cancel culture, if you will. Bernadette Lear wrote about this book as well. She said public librarians stood between authors, critics, and readers at the crossroads of highbrow, middlebrow, and popular culture. She asserts that the decision of the Concord Library, who did censor the work, was not common practice, and he uses research conducted by Robert Rodney, which finds the works were popular and found only a handful of incidents that point to censorship. So some argue that the book was completely censored, but we have evidence here that certain places censored it and certain places did not. Typically, all members often participate in book banning in order to assert cultural authority, but this didn't happen here. So we can see that the two parties were of two minds about it. They developed a reader advisory board instead. And then they had seminal book lists published by library and educators and found that Huckleberry Finn was recommended to young viewers after 1900. They also say the books by Twain were not widely censored but were evidently excluded from literary canons that librarians developed for themselves. Then you have John H. Wallace, another critic, who also had a reason to not support Huckleberry Finn. He argues that the book is the most grotesque example of racist trash. He cites several examples of the novel being challenged within schools because of complaints from children and students. He says the NAACP and the Urban National League collaborated to remove the novel from the classroom because of the use of the term nigger. Wallace argues from personal experience that allowed readings of the novel contribute to feelings of low self-esteem and to the added disrespect by white students for black people. It constitutes mental cruelty, harassment, and outright mental intimidation of force for black students to sit in a classroom reading Huckleberry Finn. Such judgment would include taking into account the age and maturity of the students, their ability to comprehend abstract, and the methodology of presentation. He also says that racism against blacks is deeply rooted in the American culture and is continually reinforced by the schools, by concerns for socioeconomic gain, and by the vicarious ego enhancement it brings those who manifest within it. He says the book insinuates blacks are dishonest, less intelligent than whites, and in some cases not human, particularly in chapter 36. The Nazi Party, the Ku Klux Klan, and White Council were the predominant writers of hate mail when the book was banned in North Virginian schools. So Henry Peacher added his conversation in when he wrote this paper, The Struggle for Tolerance. And he says the novel has been criticized and banned for an array of perceived failings, including obscenity, atheism, bad grammar, coarse manners, and low moral tone, and an attitude of anti-Southernism. He said detractors encompass parents, critics, authors, regional fundamentalists, right-wing politicians, and even librarians. The book, however, was favored by literary celebrities like T.S. Eliot, which allowed the novel the clout to be entered into classrooms. For the objections of the Gilded Age of fundamentalist religious factions and of unreconstructed Southerners had seemed laughable and transitioning, but how it gave black students and their parents the portrayal of negativity. I think that's what I was trying to write. I'm sorry. Alright, so then we also have some people who agree, so they have a rationale for teaching Huckleberry Finn. They argue that it's a central document for understanding our cultural heritage, that it draws a picture of middle America and it draws a picture of middle America in the pre-Civil War period in such a way to make clear the hypocritical, I'm crazy today, and the self-centered. It said issues so painfully not resolved today. Some people claim that the book is too sensitive to be read by a credulous reader who may too easily read Twain's indictment of the Old South as an appropriation of the morality. Yet some argue that's a literary masterpiece nonetheless because of its satire, the realistic characterization, the point of view, and the sensory depiction. Huckleberry Finn has much to teach us about ourselves as developing human beings and culture and our history. So though the book originally centered on the literary concerns when it was first banned, it has now shifted into a conversation about race and the relationship between blacks and whites and how they will be portrayed and how that portrayal and influence will add and benefit white supremacy and white and systematic racism. But overall, the book was banned earlier on for different reasons like grammar and obscenity and atheism and such things like that. However, now there is this big conversation about a racist text or when a book should be banned. For me, at this point, I have grown to be, unfortunately, I have grown to see racism in many lights, in many forms, in many ways. And I am grateful for a very well-rounded view of the world thanks to literature. And so for me, I will read Huckleberry Finn. It is something that made me uncomfortable and I didn't enjoy, but it led me to understand how the world around me operated. Do I think it's something you should put in a classroom for primary readers or secondary students? No. But I think it's something an adult or a young adult who wants to read it in their own personal time should be able to read it. It just doesn't have to be something that you put on the book list as mandatory reading in a classroom, because it is deeply uncomfortable and unsettling for the individual that's sitting there. Instead, I would argue that you put something there that does educate on the history of America, but also comes from the perspective of a black writer, so that you have a more clear view of history spoken not by the oppressor but by the oppressed party, and it'll give you a more fully rounded depiction of what it is like to live in those times. That's my personal opinion. You tell me yours, and I'll see you next time. Again, November 28th, I'll be doing a virtual launch. I know you want to attend, so I will be updating you with the details as I get them. And again, go ahead and leave me a little tap that subscription button. It really does help me and I really appreciate it. My name is Brianca Jay. I'll see you next time for Book Talk.